Chicago, John in Maine, Sharon in New Jersey, Jonathan in Thousand Oaks, the LA shtetl. Welcome everybody. Another big daf as we're approaching the end of Tractate Sotah. It's like the sages are packing it in. We're on a long digression, but they're packing in really rich stuff. Today we'll be talking about very colorful story that took place between the prophet Elisha and some local bullies. Let us see what's going on with that. How do we get there? Tractate Sotah, 18th volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 9. For a few chapters now, we've been hinging off the idea that oath and warning that was said when the Holy Temple was standing to the suspected adulteress did not have to be spoken in Lashon Kodesh, in the holy language of Hebrew. What things do have to be said in Hebrew, the blessings and curses that were spoken to the children of Israel when we entered the promised land, led by Joshua, and several other examples, including this, the Egla Arufa, the ritual of the heifer whose neck was broken when in ancient Israel a corpse was found, the victim of foul play, a murder victim, and the corpse was found in the field between towns. So the elders from the Sanhedrin, 5, would have to come from Jerusalem, measure from where the body was found to the nearest town that's large enough to have a rabbinic court of at least 23 judges. And then having established that which is the closest town, elders of that town would come to where the body is, bring this heifer that could be no more than 2 years of age, and then it would be killed, not slaughtered, right? It would be killed in an unusual way, having its neck broken from behind, and then the elders would recite that we didn't send this man away unaccompanied. We didn't neglect to feed him. We don't know why this happened, but we understand that innocent blood has been shed in the land of Israel, and it requires an atonement, and let this ritual act as an atonement for that. And the verses from the Torah that I just paraphrased would be spoken in Hebrew. That's how we got here. Now that part of their recital in this ritual is about that they didn't let this traveler go out unaccompanied, we've been learning about the mitzvah of accompanying a guest, right? So a friend, a teacher, a student who is going out on the road, it is a mitzvah to accompany them, to make sure that they're safely getting to where they're going. You may not be able to accompany them to their destination, but a certain distance, and make sure that they know where they are headed. That is a commandment. So pertaining to this, we pick it up at the bottom of page 46b. Our daf is Mem Zion, page 47 today. We are in chapter 9, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 3, I believe. Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 9. Okay, so the Gemara continues to discuss the importance of accompaniment. And Rabbi Yochanan says, in the name of Rabbi Meir, whoever does not accompany another or will not allow himself to be accompanied is like a spiller of blood and is held responsible for any deaths that occur as a result of his inaction. You really have this sense of, right, the children of Israel are responsible for one another. So the proof for this is that the inhabitants of Jericho accompanied Elisha, right? So when the children of Israel first entered the Holy Land, there was a battle at Jericho. That was the first installment of the conquest, as it were. So then Jericho became part of the Holy Land. It was part of the territory of the children of Israel. So now we're reading about an incident that is noted in second book of Kings. Elisha was a prophet. He was originally, the assistant to the prophet Elijah. and he just, followed and helped Elijah everywhere that he went. And eventually Elijah did not die. Elijah is one of those rare characters in the Bible who ascended alive. He was taken away without dying. And that is why many stories in the Talmud and why at Passover, right, we open the door and we pour a cup for Elijah, because Elijah is understood to be kind of a traveler between heaven and earth, right? He's somebody that can ascend and occupy the world of souls and sometimes comes back here, and he will be the one to herald the coming of Mashiach, the coming of the Messiah. Well, when he was alive in his initial lifetime, when he left, as it were, when he was taken up by God's angels, let's say, Elisha, right before that, Elijah said, my time has come. I'm going to be leaving any moment now. And Elisha said, and Elijah said to him, do you have any request? And Elisha said, don't leave. I have to go. Don't leave. Do you have a request? I have to go. Do you have a request? And so finally Elisha said, well, then give me a double portion of the spirit that rested on you. And Elijah said, that's very difficult. But if you merit to actually see my departure, that will be the sign that your request was granted. And Elisha did see Elijah take off. And so at that moment, Elisha became a prophet. There's a lot of stories about Elisha the prophet. This one takes place shortly after Elisha becomes a prophet. He's a rookie prophet, if you will. So in this episode, now this story is brought about the importance of accompanying a traveler, right? So the proof for this, how important it is, and that if you don't accompany the traveler, it's like you're responsible for the spilling of blood if that traveler ends up hurt. So the proof for this is that had the inhabitants of Jericho accompanied Elisha, right? They didn't accompany him. If they had, he would not have incited the bears to attack the young men. As it is stated, quote, and he went up from there to Bethel. As he was going up by the way, there came forth young lads out of the city and mocked him and said to him, go up, bald head. Go up, bald head. 2 Kings 2:23. Now, had the residents of Jericho accompanied him, they would have scattered those youths and prevented what happened next. And the Gemara proceeds to discuss this episode in detail, beginning with the meaning of the taunting that these young men made. They said to Elisha, go up, away from here, for you have made the place bald, i.e. bare for us. They had previously earned their living by providing the city of Jericho with water. And Elisha, in the episode right before this, had sweetened the city's own water, rendering the services of these water carriers unnecessary. So that's why they were mad at Elisha, and they kind of bullied him and taunted him. Now the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of this word, Neorim? Translated here as young lads. Neorim ketanim, right? Neorim ketanim, young lads. Now one would have expected the verse to state either youngsters or lads, but not young lads. So Rabbi Elazar says the word lads, ne'arim, means that they were shaken empty, menoarim, of the mitzvahs. And the word young, ketanim, means that they were of little faith. Ketane amana, they had very little faith, as they had no trust that they would be able to earn their livelihood by any other means. Right? It's tragic when it happens that new technology or a local, visiting prophet renders a bunch of people's jobs obsolete. Right? So what are they going to do in that situation? Okay, well, now they have to find new work, not, attack and bully and taunt, the bringer of what is otherwise a blessing to the city. So the sages taught they were lads, that is, already of age, but they disgraced themselves like young children. Right? It's not that these were children, it's they were young men who were acting like children and taking out their anger on Elisha. So now Rav Yosef objects to this interpretation. And perhaps they were called Neorim after their place of origin. Isn't it written? And the Arameans had gone out in bands and had brought away captive from the land of Israel a minor young woman, Nara Kitana. And this verse raised a difficulty to us, a minor and a young woman. How could she be both of these? And Rabbi Pedas says it means a minor girl from the town of Neorim. And this verse concerning the lads could possibly be explained in a similar manner, that they were young children from the town of Neorim. And the Gemara answers these two cases are not comparable. There, the verse does not specify her place of origin, so Nara could mean from the town of Neorim. But here, the verse specifies that they're from Jericho. Now, the verse further states with regard to the same incident, and he turned behind him and saw them, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Now, there's a lot of discussion that you can make about this incident. Bottom line, that he was leaving the city after having performed a service for the city, and he was jeered, bullied, taunted by a large group of these young men, young lads, etc. I mean, it's sort of like he was confronted by a mob, right? Now, either because he was in fear for his life, or because he was protecting the dignity of God, as it were, because at this moment he is a prophet. He's a proven prophet, right? Elijah is one of the greatest prophets of all time. This was his assistant. When Elijah left, he left in such a way that Elisha was clearly, with great clarity, promoted to prophet, right? He was now a prophet, and he had just performed a miracle in taking the water supply of Jericho, which had been undrinkable since anyone could remember, and he made it drinkable, right? Just, with a little miracle. And so now, if people are going to insult the honor of a prophet, it's like insulting the honor of a Torah scholar. Even if you're a humble person and you don't care, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. You actually can't allow the insult to stand because it's an insult to God, right? If you are God's representative in this world, and that's what a prophet was during the age of prophecy, you can't allow these insults to be hurled at you and just, turn away. So what did he do? He cursed them. Not all of them, but 42 of them. Right, so you can see that was some subset of the group, how big a group it was that was, besetting Elisha. So it continues, right? And there, so where are we? Right, and so, quote, and he turned behind him, and he saw them, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. That's how he defended himself in the honor of God, by cursing them. Now, you and I can curse someone, and, we're just going to come off as potty mouths. But when a prophet curses someone, so that has tremendous power. He's just unleashed the full force of a prophet on these people. So what happens? The Gemara asks, what did he see? Well, there are 4 explanations offered for what it is that Elisha saw. Rav says he literally saw, i.e. he stared and bored his eyes into them. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, wherever it says that the sages placed their eyes upon a certain person, they brought upon that person either death or poverty. And Shmuel says he saw their essential nature. Right? Just at a glance, he was able to recognize what kind of people these really were. And he saw that all their mothers became pregnant with them on Yom Kippur, when conjugal relations are forbidden, right? That all these bad boys, very bad, are the product of sin. And Rabbi Yitzchak Napaka says he saw that they had plaited locks grown on the back of their heads like the Gentiles. And Rabbi Yochanan says he saw that they did not contain even a smidgen of a mitzvah. Right? These are people who had no merit to protect them because they had never in their lives tried to be righteous people. And the Gemara raises an objection to this last interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan. But how could he curse them? Just because they didn't have any mitzvahs? Perhaps their descendants would have many mitzvahs. And Rabbi Elazar says he saw that the mitzvahs would be found neither in them nor in their descendants through all generations. A very generous read of what Elisha was able to perceive at a glance from these people. Now, don't underestimate the fact that he's a prophet. He is, by definition, a miracle maker, a miracle seer, right? So he could, if this was true, he could see it. But at any rate, what happened next? And the verse states, after he cursed them, and 2 she-bears, right? In Hebrew, you could tell that's a female bear. 2 female bears came out of the forest and tore 42 of the lads from them. Now we're on 47a. We've reached our page. Rav and Shmuel had a dispute with regard to this episode. One says that there was a miracle, and one says that there was a miracle within a miracle. And the Gemara explains, the one who says there was a miracle claims that there was already a forest in that place, but there were no bears. And the miracle was the appearance of bears. And the one who says it was a miracle within a miracle claims that neither was there a forest nor were there bears in that area. So the Gemara asks with respect to the second opinion, so what was the double miracle? And let there be bears and no forest. The forest served no role in the story, so why did Elisha, summon a miracle of creating both the forest and the bears? And the Gemara explains the forest was necessary as bears are frightened to venture into open areas, but will attack people in their natural habitat, which is a forest. Bottom line, it's not like Israel is a place that is known for having giant grizzly bears that attack humans. There are bears in Israel, but they're pretty shy. They're not so big. And when humans come around, they run away. But so what? This is a miracle that, he cursed them and suddenly 2 bears appear. Why female bears? Because female bears protecting, baby bears are the most ferocious. Rabbi Hanina says, due to the 42 offerings that Balak, the king of Moab, brought when he tried to have Bilam curse the Jewish people, 42 young lads were broken off from Israel in that incident involving Elisha. Understand, these 42 young men who are without mitzvahs or the product of sin, whatever, are Jews. And now, because of this curse, 42 of them were torn to bits. And the Gemara asks, is that so? Was that the reward for his offerings? Balak tried to curse the Jewish people and enticing, Bilam, to the prophet in that time, to curse the Jewish people. Balak made offerings. He's going to be rewarded by that generations later. Generations later, by having 42 children, Jewish children killed. What's the, how does one lead to the other? But didn't Rav Yehuda say that? Rav says a person should always engage in Torah study and in the performance of mitzvahs, even if he does not do so not for their own sake, even if he does so not for their own sake, as through such acts performed not for their own sake, one will come to perform them for their own sake. And he proves the value of a mitzvah done not for its own sake, as in reward for the 42 offerings that Balak, king of Moab, brought. After all, he made offerings to God, to the one God. He merited not necessarily that 42 children were killed later, but rather that Ruth descended from him, from whom King Solomon descended, right? So Balak, this king of Moab, it must be that Ruth is somehow descended from him, and eventually she, would be, and King David would be descended from her. About whom it is written that this king Balak, Balak, the king of Moab, he merited that Ruth descended from him and King Solomon descended from her, right? Because King Solomon was the son of David who descended from her. And King Solomon brought 1,000 burnt offerings. And Rabbi Yosef, so because he gave offerings to God, eventually one of his descendants was King Solomon, who, brought thousands of offerings. And Rabbi Yosef ben Choni similarly says, Ruth was the daughter of Eglon, the son of Balak. And these sages state that Balak's reward was to have Ruth descend from him, not that a number of Jewish people perish in this episode with Elisha. And the Gemara answers, his desire, in any event, was to curse the Jewish people. And his reward for sacrificing his offerings was that the curse was fulfilled in the incident involving Elisha as well. it's an odd way to make this proof, but the general principle is very important. It comes up repeatedly in the Talmud that even if you're doing mitzvahs for the wrong reason, like so that other people will admire you, for example, or the community will respect you, which is not the reason you should be doing mitzvahs, but at least you're doing the mitzvahs. And one who does mitzvahs not for their own sake, who keeps doing them, will eventually come to do them for their own sake. It's always good to do a mitzvah, even if your motivation is off. Now the Gemara returns to discussing the incident involving Elisha. And the men of the city said to Elisha, "Behold, please, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord sees, but the water is bad and the land miscarries." And the Gemara asks, but if the water is bad and the land causes women to miscarry, so what is pleasant about it? And Rabbi Hanan says, the grace of a place is upon its inhabitants. In other words, people find a reason to like where they live, even if it's full of shortcomings. And Rabbi Yochanan says, there are 3 graces that have a similar impact. The grace of a place upon its inhabitants, even if it's a terrible place, people will come to like it if they live there. The grace of a woman upon her husband, even if she's not so great, but he's married to her, he'll start to like her, and despite her faults. And the grace of a purchased item upon its buyer, as one who has bought something wants to view it in a positive light and eventually does so. Now, is this story being brought to tell us that Elisha acted correctly when he cursed, right, these young people who were taunting him? I mean, after all, since he's a prophet and a miracle worker, maybe he could have, created a force field, stunned them, frozen them, turned them away from him, defended himself. Did he have to curse them so that 2 bears would suddenly show up and tear 42 of them to bits? Did he act correctly as a rookie prophet when he did that? The sages taught Elisha fell ill 3 times. One was a punishment for inciting the bears to attack the young lads. And one was a punishment for pushing Gehazi away with both hands without leaving him the option to return. And one was the sickness from which he died, as an expression of illness is stated 3 times in the verse about Elisha, 2 Kings 13:14, quote, "And Elisha became sick, chala, with his illness, cholyo, from which he would die." And the root ches lamed he, which indicates illness, is used twice in this verse, and it is stated once that Elisha will die. So the sages taught it should always be the left, the weaker hand, that pushes another person away, and the right, which is the stronger hand for most people, that draws a person near, right? We always balance the right and the left hand, but one is always a little bit stronger than the other. And so we have this idea that the right hand represents kindness and draws people toward us, and it's the left hand that is a little bit weaker that we use to push people away. So that generally speaking, we'd like to draw nearer to people rather than further away. Heisman, for those who know what the Heisman Trophy is. Okay, so the sages taught, it shows me the left, the weaker hand that pushes away, and the right, which is a little stronger, that draws near. In other words, even when a student is rebuffed by his teacher, he should be given the opportunity to return. And this is not like Elisha, who pushed his student Gehazi away with both hands, and not like Yehoshua ben Parachia, who pushed Jesus the Nazarene, one of his students, away with both hands. Ooh, I bet a lot of ears just perked up. Jesus the Nazarene sounds like the founder of Christianity. We're going to talk more about this a little bit later in the daf. What was that story? But Rav Steinsaltz points out that story occurred in the late Second Temple period, about 70 years before the Common Era. Impossible that this was the same person. Jesus is how we're pronouncing it in English. Here it's written Yeshu, but that was not an uncommon name at that time, and a Nazarene was not an uncommon appellation. So we're not talking about the same person in this particular story. nor is the Jesus, the Nazarene in this particular story, such a great person, as we shall see. Now, the Gemara specifies, what was the incident with Elisha? As it is written, and Naaman said, pray, take talents. 2 Kings 5:23. Naaman offered Gehazi payment for the help Elisha had given him, right? Gehazi was Elisha's steward, and he was sort of like, he was the gatekeeper, as it were, the gatekeeper for the prophet. Once you're established as a prophet, everybody wants your attention. Everybody wants you to perform a miracle for them. So you need a steward, a gatekeeper like this man Gehazi was for Elisha. And it looks like Gehazi maybe took a little bit advantage of his position, right? So Naaman said, pray, take talents. Talents are money, right? A kind of coin. And Naaman offered Gehazi payment for the help that Elisha had given him, right? After Elisha had already helped him. So he wanted to, pay for it. He wanted to reward the prophet. And he said, here, take this money for Elisha. And what happened? And when the verse recounts Elisha's word to Gehazi, it is written, and he said to him, did not my heart go when the man turned back from his chariot to meet you? Is it a time to take money and to take garments and olives and vineyards and sheep and oxen and servants and maidservants? And here Elisha is criticizing Gehazi for taking the payment. Now, it's not that Gehazi is acting corruptly and keeping this money for himself. He's probably thinking, well, Elisha just doesn't understand money. He's a holy miracle worker, and he doesn't understand that, we got to keep the organization afloat, as it were. We're traveling around. We're going from one place to another. We need money. We need money. So if people want to offer us money, so that I can make sure Elisha has a roof over his head every night and we have what to eat in our travels, it's a good thing. But Elisha told him, we don't take money for the work that we do, period. Right? So Gehazi had disobeyed Elisha, or at least, I don't know if Elisha had told him not to take the money before, but at any rate, Elisha made it clear that he shouldn't have done it. Now, the Gemara clarifies the criticism. And did Gehazi take all those things? But it was only money and garments that he took. So Rabbi Yitzchak says at that time Elisha was engaged in the study of the topic of the 8 impure creeping animals, right? So he's not just a prophet, he's a Torah scholar. And the sages, see him many generations before the sages of the Talmud. I mean, this is 1,000 years before, that Elisha was prophesying, but he was studying the Torah just like, they would be studying it 1,000 years later. And what he was studying was the sharitzim, right? So we've said that when a dead creeping thing, for example, falls into a clay oven, so that clay oven is rendered impure and there's no way to purify it. It's going to have to be smashed. But which are the creeping animals that count as the 8 creeping animals that when they're dead and, they will transmit tuma, ritual impurity? That's actually not so clearly defined, and sages all over the Gemara, argue back and forth about which are the 8 creeping animals. So Elisha was studying that subject, and he said to Gehazi, wicked one, it is time for you to receive now, in this world, the reward for studying the topic of the 8 impure creeping animals. This is why the verse lists 8 items. And the Gemara adds parenthetically that Elisha also said to Gehazi, and the tsaras of Naaman, right? Naaman came to be cured of tsaras. He was a mitzora. And the tsaras of Naaman shall cleave to you and your descendants forever. And that the verse later states, now there were 4 mitzoras, 4 men who were mitzoras, about whom Rabbi Yochanan says this is referring to Gehazi and his 3 sons. Elisha was a short-tempered fellow, it looks like. Not only did he curse these bullies that were taunting him and insulting him, but he even unloaded, this curse at his assistant Gehazi, who I guess had not represented him well. And the verse states, and Elisha came to Damascus. And the Gemara asks, for what purpose did he go there? And Rabbi Yochanan says he went to help Gehazi in repentance. But Gehazi would not agree to repent from his evil ways. Elisha said to him, return from your sins. And Gehazi said to him, this is the tradition that I received from you. whoever sins and causes the masses to sin is not given the opportunity to repent. It's one thing that you sin. If you sin, any sins that you do, you're going to have some kind of opportunity to repent for them. But if you cause others to sin, if you cause many other people to sin, you won't have an opportunity to atone for that. And the Gemara asks, what did Gehazi do that caused the masses to sin? And there are those who say that he hung a magnetic rock on Jeroboam's calf. Jeroboam was, when Solomon died, the kingdom split in two, right? And that is when it became the kingdom of Judah, which maintained the throne of David and Solomon, and where the temple stood in Jerusalem, and the kingdom of Israel, right? Which it was called Israel, but it was a rebellious kingdom. It had the other 10 tribes in it, and eventually they would fall to Assyria, and those became the lost tribes of Israel. But it stood for a long time, and there were all the kings of Israel who were not really legitimate kings, since they were. It was at the same time the throne of David in Jerusalem. They had this other throne, this other kingdom. And because they didn't want their people going to their enemy's capital city and temple in Jerusalem, they created their own temple in the kingdom of Israel. Everything about this was bad. So Gehazi participated, somehow helped Jeroboam establish this illegitimate temple with its illegitimate altar and its illegitimate idols that people came and made sacrifices to it. And what did he do? He hung a magnetic rock on Jeroboam's calf, the golden calf that Jeroboam established as an idol. And Gehazi used a magnet to pull the calf off the ground so that he suspended it between heaven and earth and caused it to hover above the ground. And this seemingly miraculous occurrence caused the people to worship it even more devoutly. And there are those who say, no, that's not what happened. Rather, he engraved the sacred name on its mouth. And it would say, I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have other gods before me. And the idol would quote the 2 prohibitions from the 10 commandments against idol worship, causing people to worship it even more devoutly. I mean, you could see what a horrible episode this was in Jewish history, that, there was another kingdom, a rival kingdom with an illegitimate throne and an illegitimate temple and an illegitimate altar. And it was characterized by, what was the big feature of it? A golden calf. And the people were just told, no, you heard about a golden calf. There was a golden calf in the desert, and this is now the golden calf where you're going to go worship. And the people bought into it because they had no choice, because that's what the king of that kingdom ordered. Terrible, terrible sin. So if Gehazi advised that king and helped him set up that illegitimate temple, Gehazi, major sin, one that he would not be given an opportunity to atone for. And there are those who say that Gehazi did something else. What did he do? He pushed the sages away from coming before him, preventing them from learning from Elisha. Okay, this seems like a much smaller sin. While he was Elisha's steward, there were a lot of sages in that generation who wanted to come learn from the foremost prophet of the generation, and he kept them away, right? He acted as that gatekeeper to Elisha, including keeping away Torah scholars who wanted to ask Elisha questions, since he was a conduit to the Lord. And that was his sin. As it is written, after the aforementioned incident, and the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, behold, this place where we are staying before you is too cramped for us. And this proves by inference that until that time, the place was not cramped, as Gehazi would turn people away. Now, the Gemara returns to the incident in which Yehoshua ben Parachia turned away Jesus the Nazarene. As I mentioned, this is an earlier Jesus. It's not the one associated with Christianity. What is this incident? When King Yanai was killing the sages, terrible king, who, because the sages wouldn't just rubber stamp whatever this king wanted to do, he kind of went to war with them, and he was killing Torah scholars right and left. So whoever survived those purges went into hiding. The foremost scholar in that generation was Shimon ben Shattach, who was actually the brother of King Yanai's wife, the queen. So she hid her brother. She was a righteous person, even though her husband was a wicked king. So when King Yanai was killing the sages, Shimon ben Shatach was hidden by his sister, Yanai's wife, while Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia went and fled from Israel and went down to Alexandria in Egypt. Now, when peace was made between Yanai and the sages, like he sort of stopped persecuting and genociding the sages, but it really wasn't totally safe for the sages to, come out of hiding in Israel until Yanai died. But okay, there was a respite in his persecution of the sages. So when peace was made between Yanai and the sages, Shimon ben Shatach sent a message to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia in Alexandria, saying, "From myself, Jerusalem, the holy city, to you, Alexandria of Egypt. My sister, my husband dwells within you, and I am sitting desolate." Right? It was like a cryptic telegram. But Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia said, I can learn from this that there is peace and I can return to Israel. So when he came back to Israel, Rabbi Yehoshua arrived at a certain inn, right? An inn on the way. And the innkeeper stood before him, honoring him considerably. And overall, they accorded him great honor. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia then sat and was praising them by saying, "Wow, how beautiful is this inn? You're taking very good care of me. And I must say, you run a wonderful establishment here." And one of his students, named Jesus the Nazarene, said to him, "My teacher, but the eyes of the innkeeper's wife are narrow." Right? In other words, he was being very, Yehoshua was being very polite and saying, "Oh, you have a beautiful establishment, you have a beautiful family, beautiful wife." He was saying everything is beautiful. And his student was saying, "Well, how can you say the woman is beautiful? She's not actually so beautiful. Are you not telling some kind of a lie?" Right? And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia said to his student, "Wicked one, is this what you are engaged in, gazing at women?" And he brought out 400 shofarot and excommunicated his student. Because you can imagine, it's incredibly harsh, but probably the student spoke out loud about the woman in front of the innkeeper and really created an embarrassing situation. And so he scolded the student in front of the innkeeper. That was the incident. Now, every day, this man Yeshu, English Jesus, but let's call him Yeshu, not the Jesus that we normally would think of by that name. So every day Yeshu would come before him, but he would not accept his wish to return. So one day Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia was reciting the Shema when Yeshu came before him. And at that point, Rabbi Yehoshua intended to accept him. He was going to, okay, he's done enough penance, he's going to take him back. But he couldn't answer him at that moment because he was engaged in praying at the moment that Yeshu came up to him. And so he signaled to Yeshu with his hand, "Oh, wait, just wait." But Yeshu thought he was being rejected once again, and that this was the final rejection where Rabbi Yehoshua wouldn't even speak to him. So Yeshu therefore went and stood up a brick and worshipped it as an idol. Right? Because he was so frustrated and mad that he wasn't getting what he wanted when he wanted. He said, "Well, that's it. Right? I'm going all the way off the derrick, right? Off the path. I'm going to do the worst thing I can do, and that's idolatry." He wasn't going to commit murder. He wasn't going to commit rape. So the next best thing, if you want to do the worst thing you could possibly do, is idolatry. Right? He's a Torah scholar now committing idolatry. And worshipped as an idol. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia said to him, "Return from your sins." Yeshu said, "This is the tradition that I received from you. Anyone who sins and causes the masses to sin is not given the opportunity to repent." So the Gemara explains how Yeshu caused the masses to sin. For the master said, Yeshu the Nazarene performed sorcery, and he incited the masses and subverted the masses and caused the Jewish people to sin. The incident is not explained, but it seems like he did that. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, with regard to the evil inclination to a child and to a woman, the left hand should reject and the right hand should welcome. If one pushes too forcefully, the damage might be irreversible. We left the topic of those incidents, where Elisha was like this other person. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Parachia pushed away his student too hard, just like Elisha pushed away his student too hard. And so now the takeaway before we leave this Gemara on Mishnah number 3 is anyone that you're responsible for. If you're talking about your spouse, your child, your employee, your student, right? Anyone that you're responsible to, you're in a leadership position with them. Okay, there are going to be some times when you need to rebuke and to scold, but you have to make sure that the hand that is pushing away is weaker than the hand that is drawing near. Mishnah number 4 here in chapter 9. If the killer is found before the heifer's neck was broken, the heifer shall go out and graze among the herd. It is not considered sacred at all, and it may rejoin the other animals. If the killer is found from the time when the heifer's neck was broken, even if the rest of the ritual has not yet been performed, it is prohibited to benefit from the animal, despite the killer having been found. So it should be buried in its place. And this is because the heifer initially came for uncertainty. We don't know who killed this body that was found in the field. And so the heifer atoned for this uncertainty, and then it left, meaning it fulfilled its purpose of bringing atonement, and it is considered a heifer whose neck is broken in all regards, even though the killer was identified between the time that the heifer's neck was broken and when the ritual would have concluded. It's considered as if it concluded because we broke the neck of the heifer. And if the heifer's neck was broken, and afterward the killer was found, he is killed, right? Even though we performed the ritual and it's considered that it atoned for the sin, that doesn't mean that if we then find the killer, that we let the killer go. Au contraire, we definitely execute the killer or take whatever measures of justice are needed. Now, if one witness says, I saw the killer, right? The whole idea of the Egla Arufa is it's a ritual we do when we find a body that's a victim of murder and we don't know who the murderer is. So now we're discussing, well, what happens if we find out who the killer was? Or if witnesses come forward and they say they saw the killer. Well, what if we have one witness, which doesn't establish a matter, as in general, it takes 2 witnesses to establish a matter. So if one witness says, I saw the killer, and one other witness says you did not see him, or if a woman says, and traditionally in Judaism, a woman is not a qualified witness, so you did not, or if a woman says, I saw, and another woman says you did not see, so they would still break the neck of the heifer, as without clear testimony about the identity of the killer, the ritual is performed. Similarly, if one witness says, I saw the killer, and 2 witnesses say, you did not see, they would break the neck of the heifer, as we rely on the pair of witnesses. If 2 witnesses say, we saw the killer, and one witness says you did not see, meaning you weren't there in the place where you're saying you were to see the witness, to see the killer, they would not break. They would break the neck, right? If 2 witnesses say we saw the killer and one witness says you did not see, of course they break the neck because we rely on the pair of witnesses. If 2 witnesses say, they would If 2 witnesses say we saw the killer, and one witness says to them you did not see, they would not break the neck of the heifer, right? Because if 2 witnesses say we saw the killer, so then we don't break the neck because we know who the killer is. 2 witnesses saw the killer, and one witness says about them you weren't there, you didn't see it. We don't believe the one witness. We say, okay, well, 2 people saw the killer is known, so this is no longer a victim of an unsolved murder, so we don't break the neck of the heifer. Now the Mishnah further states, from the time when murderers proliferated in the land, the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken was nullified. The ritual was performed only when the identity of the murderer was completely unknown. And once there were many known murderers, the conditions for the performance of the ritual was no longer present, as the probable identity of the murderer was known. It's not that, detectives came forward and said, that's the guy, right? And now we're going to take him to trial. We didn't get that far. But once there was a proliferation of murderers in the land, so it's like we have to assume that, somebody who killed this guy is known as a killer, hasn't been brought to justice, but people know that guy's a killer. So we can't say that the killer is not known. And at that point, they did away with this ritual and didn't do it anymore. From the time when Eliezer ben Dinai, who was also called Tehina ben Perisha, came, they renamed him son of a murderer. And this is an example of a publicly known murderer. That's how we know that murderers proliferated in the land. And the Mishnah teaches a similar occurrence from the time when adulterers proliferated. The performance of the ritual of the bitter waters, the subject of our tractate, was nullified. Right? In that they would not administer the bitter waters to the Sotah. Why? Because we learned earlier in the tractate that if a husband commits adultery, he loses the right to bring his wife as a suspected adulteress to the temple to have her drink the water, right? He is not without sin in the same matter, and therefore we don't bring his wife to drink the bitter water. And so they're saying that as the level of the people kept descending, we weren't at a high enough spiritual level that we would do the ritual of the Egla Arufa. We would not do the ritual of the Sotah. And you could see it's like, the spiritual level of the land of Israel, of the children of Israel, just kept going down. And that's eventually resulted in the first temple being destroyed. There was an exile. They built the second temple, but the second temple was never as holy as the first temple. It stood for a long time, but eventually it was destroyed and has not yet been rebuilt. So it's like when the people reached the apex of their spiritual level, as we crossed the Red Sea and came to Sinai, maybe and entered the Promised Land, and we're living the Torah life, for a certain amount of time. And then, the people were they failed at keeping the Torah life that they were commanded to keep. And so that now we're marking this sort of gradual descent of the spiritual level of the people. Now, from the time when Yosei ben Yoezer of Tereda and Yosei ben Yehud of Jerusalem died, the clusters ceased, i.e., they were the last of the clusters as explained in the Gemara, meaning these were great, great Torah scholars. And even our Torah scholars that we know in the Talmud were not at the level as these earlier great sages. We learn about them in Pirkei Avos, right? The chain of transmission of the Torah all the way down through the men of the Great Assembly, etc. So they were the last of the clusters, the really great Torah scholars. As it is stated, there is no cluster to eat, nor first ripe fig that my soul desires. Micah 7:1. And the Mishnah continues in the same vein. Yochanan the high priest took away the declaration of the tithe. After his time, no one recited the passage about the elimination of tithes that had previously been said at the end of the 3-year tithing cycle. And he also nullified the actions of the awakeners and the strikers at the temple. Until his days, the hammer of smiths would strike in Jerusalem on the intermediate days of the festival. But he banned the practice. And furthermore, in his days, there was no need to inquire about demai, doubtfully tithed produce, as everyone was careful to tithe. But eventually we had to inquire because the spiritual level of the population kept diminishing. Now we're on 47b, the Gemara on Mishnah number 4. These are such long dafs. I'll just keep going and I'm going to go as fast as I can. But it's just a very long daf. Today's, tomorrow's, and Friday's. Very long dafs. The sages taught, from where is it derived if the heifer's neck was broken and afterward the killer was found? Then the breaking of the neck does not exempt him from punishment. And the verse states, and the land shall not be atoned for the blood that was spilled in it, but by the blood of he who spilled it. And the Mishnah taught that if one witness says, I saw the killer, and another testifies, you did not see him, well, they would break the heifer's neck. And the Gemara infers the reason they break the neck is because the second witness contradicts him. But if no witness contradicts him, the one witness is relied upon. You can't rely on one witness to execute a murderer, but you can rely on one witness to say the murderer is known and we don't do the ritual of the Egla Arufa. Now, from where are these matters derived? And the Gemara answers that it is, as the sages taught in a Baraisa, it states with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, it is not known who has smitten him. Consequently, if it was known who smote him, even if it was only one person at the end of the world who knew, they would not break the neck of the heifer. Rabbi Akiva says, from where is it derived that if the members of the Sanhedrin themselves saw one person kill someone, but they do not recognize him, then they would not break the neck of the heifer. And the verse states, nor did our eyes see. And did they not see? Seeing the murder alone obviates the need for the performance of the ritual. Maybe they don't know the identity of the murderer, but if they saw the murder being committed, that's enough so that we don't do the ritual. So the Gemara poses a question. Now that you have said that in this case one witness is relied upon, if so, how is the other one able to contradict him? Didn't Ula say wherever the Torah relies on one witness, there is the equivalent of the testimony of two witnesses here? Right? In a place where the Torah says you can rely on one witness, just like we rely on one witness to say that a husband was killed overseas to allow his wife to remarry, she's taking a risk. If the guy actually wasn't dead and he comes back, she's going to have huge problems. But in the meantime, if there's only one witness that her husband died, we allow her to remarry based on the testimony of one witness. In cases like that and like this, where we allow something to happen on the testimony of one witness, so then the one witness is treated like two witnesses. So why should it matter if this one witness is then contradicted by two witnesses? Since we say one witness is enough, it should be like that's the equivalent of two witnesses. And if you have two witnesses versus two witnesses, would it be a different result? So wherever the Torah relies on one witness, it's like there's two witnesses. And the statement of one witness has no standing in a place where it is contradicted by two witnesses. And the Gemara answers, Ula could have said to you that the text of the Mishnah should be amended and teach the Mishnah like this. They would not break the neck of the heifer. And Rabbi Yitzhak also said to teach they would not break the neck, right? So they would not break the neck with one witness for sure because of this situation. But what if two witnesses then come and say, you couldn't have seen that? That's a different question. And Rabbi Chia said that one should teach. They would break the neck. And the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Chia, the ruling of Ula is difficult. So the Gemara answers, no, it's not difficult. As here in the Mishnah, the case is discussing when two witnesses came simultaneously. And therefore, both of their testimonies are rejected. Whereas there, with regard to the statement of Ula, it's referring to a case where it came one after the other. Ula rules that once we accept the testimony of the first witness, so we've accepted it, and now another witness comes to contradict it, he can't nullify it. We learned in the Mishnah, because it takes one witness to establish that the killer is known. It would take two witnesses to establish that the first witness is lying. You can't do that with one witness. Now we learned in the Mishnah, if one witness says, I saw the killer, and two say, you did not see, well, then they would break the neck, right? Because now the one has been discredited, so we don't know who the killer was, and that's why we do break the neck. That's what we would expect. Now the Gemara says, and according to your reasoning that the Mishnah states this case in order to teach an inference, say the latter clause of in the Mishnah where it said, if two witnesses say we saw, and one witness says you did not see, they would not break the neck, right? Two witnesses saw, so now we've established who the killer is, so then we don't break the neck because we know who the killer is. Even if a single witness comes and says, you two are lying, we don't believe him. Therefore, if one came and then the other came, i.e. they did not come simultaneously, they would break the neck. And the two inferences from the different clauses of the Mishnah consequently contradict each other. So that can't be. So the correct understanding is that the entire Mishnah is not dealing with valid witnesses and stating the obvious law in order to enable an inference, but rather is dealing with people who are disqualified from bearing witness and is also teaching us a novel ruling. And the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Nehemiah, who says, wherever the Torah relies on one witness, follow the majority of opinions. In other words, if the testimony, in a place where we allow the testimony of one witness to establish a matter, in that area of the law, when more than one witness comes forward, we go with the majority, right? If they're contradicting each other, we're going to just go with the majority in those cases. And they establish that with regard to the testimony of two women who are usually disqualified from testifying, when they testify against one man, that it should be like that of two men against one man, and the court will rule in accordance with the testimony of the two women. And there are those who say a different version of Rabbi Nehemiah's opinion. Anywhere that one valid witness came at the outset, even 100 women who later contradict him are considered like one witness, and they do not override his testimony. And with what are we dealing here in the Mishnah? A case where a woman came at the outset, and she testified that she saw the killer, so the killer is known. Then two other women arrived and contradicted her, and said, you couldn't have seen that, you weren't there. So then two other women arrive. And according to this interpretation, you must amend the statement of Rabbi Nehemiah so that it reads like this. Rabbi Nehemiah says, wherever the Torah relies on one witness, follow the majority of opinions. And they established that 2 women against 1 woman is like 2 men against 1 man. But 2 women in opposition to 1 man, who is a valid witness, is like half of a pair of witnesses and half of a pair of witnesses. And the Mishnah did not address that case. So half a pair versus half a pair, and the Mishnah didn't address that. So the Gemara poses a question on these 2 interpretations of the Mishnah. All right, at this pace, I want to keep it under an hour. We're just not going to make it with a stopping point near the bottom of page 47b. So I'm going to just skip how they're proving witnesses versus witness. But here, this is a teaching that is a little bit more emotionally striking about the descent of the spiritual level of the people. So from the time, said the Mishnah, when murderers proliferated, they nullified the ritual of the Egla Arufa because it only comes in cases of uncertainty. And now we know there's a lot of murderers around, and they're known as murderers. And so probably someone knows who killed this person. And now the Gemara is going to give a bunch of other examples of this descending spiritual level. And from the time when adulterers proliferated, we nullified the ritual of the Sotah. Why? Because the men were committing adultery, and so we're not going to, bring their wives as suspected adulteresses to the temple to drink the bitter water. And then I'm going to skip forward a little bit. And from the time when those who accept benefit from others proliferated, meaning those who take bribes, the laws became twisted and deeds became corrupted, and there was no comfort in the world. And from the time when those who look at the faces of litigants in judgment in order to rule based on the appearance of the litigants, from the time these people proliferated, right, they just chose whoever just looked like in other words, they didn't examine the witnesses thoroughly. They were lax in running their courtrooms, as it were. So this was, a terrible thing for the nation. So from the time that these kinds of judges proliferated, what happened? From the time when those proliferated, the fulfillment of the verse, you shall not fear any man, from the time that these kinds of judges proliferated, the fulfillment of the verse, you shall not fear the face of any man, ceased. And the fulfillment of the verse, you shall not respect faces in judgment, halted. And they removed the yoke of heaven from themselves and placed upon themselves the yoke of flesh and blood. These judges became less insufficient. They became less God-fearing, insufficiently God-fearing, not God-fearing. A terrible state of affairs for the nation. From the time when those who whisper whisperings in judgment, meaning judges who advise surreptitiously, from the time such judges proliferated, fierce anger proliferated in Israel, and the Shekhinah, the divine presence, departed, because it is stated, God stands in the congregation of God. In the midst of the judges, he judges. The divine presence that dwells among the judges leaves if they judge improperly. Now you can hear that the sages were very ready to look inward, to look at our own people, our own nation, and, speak truth, right? There were too many corrupt judges in the land, and that's why eventually the temple was destroyed. And from the time when those who showed their arrogance by drawing out spittle proliferated, the number of haughty people in general proliferated, and the number of students decreased, and the Torah needed to go around seeking people to study it. Nice image. Furthermore, tragic image. Furthermore, from the time when haughty people proliferated, the daughters of Israel began marrying haughty men, as our generation looks only at the face, meaning the external aspects of a person, and ignores the inner aspects of a person. But the Gemara challenges this. Is that so? Do women really wish to marry arrogant men? But didn't the master say one who is haughty is not even accepted by the members of his household? Right? And so initially a woman jumps at a chance to marry someone who looks like he's rich and powerful. Later she'll lose respect for him when she realizes what he's really like, a haughty man, but he can carry out the act for a little while. Also says the Mishna, the Gemara says a Baraisa said, from the time when there was an increase in those who placed upon homeowners the obligation to designate the profits from merchandise for the upkeep of judges, bribery and corruption of judgment proliferated and good ceased. And lastly, before I go to questions and comments, from the time when women with, quote, stretched forth necks and wanton eyes proliferated, the bitter waters of the Sotah proliferated, as more and more people were suspected of committing adultery, but they eventually ceased when licentiousness became too widespread. That's why they no longer did the ritual of the Sotah. And from the time when those who accept gifts proliferated, the days decreased and the years shortened, as it is written, and he who hates gifts lives, right? He who hates corruption will live a longer life. And from the time when those with boastful hearts proliferated, dispute proliferated in Israel. And from the time when the students of Shammai and Hillel, who did not serve their rabbis sufficiently, when they proliferated, dispute proliferated in Israel, and the Torah became like two Torahs. And from the time when those who accept charity from Gentiles proliferated, the Jewish people were above and they below, meaning, this is a euphemism, meaning that this was just another, the Jews need to take care of each other. So if Jews can't find charity within the Jewish people, have to go looking elsewhere for the help that they need, it just shows that the overall level of the people has descended terribly. And all of these markers, right, were what caused us to lose the land of Israel, lose the second temple. And these are the markers that now, when you see this in a society, fear for that society. Okay. Questions and comments. And I know we've run long, so I will keep it brief. How did they determine that Elisha, says Sharon, how did they determine Elisha was studying the classes of creeping things? They inferred that from the fact that, there were 8, I don't know if there were 8 words in the verse or 8, they were able to point to 8 things that called his attention. And they said, the number 8 in the context of study is like the 8 creeping things. Jonathan, I loved reading about the magnetism trick. Great that science was alive and well. I prefer this idea to the magic of write a name on an object and suddenly it talks. Right, but interesting, right, that they use magnetism as a way to trick the people. Interesting that magnetism was a known phenomena in the times not only of the Gemara, but even in the times of the First Temple. Bill, it's a temple artifice trick. I know this is an awful scene, but it's fascinating to me. This is actually a pretty common thing in the ancient world. A famous ancient engineer, Heron of Alexander, who basically invented the steam engine thousands of years ahead of time, made his living making these sorts of mechanized idols for pagan temples. That is fascinating. And that's what I've got for us today. We're very close to the end. This was page 47. Tomorrow's Thursday. We'll do 48. I'll really try to keep it moving. Again, it's another long daf. And then on 49, at our usual Friday time of noon Pacific, we'll make a siyum on tractate Sotah with God's help. So bring something to make a l'chaim and a snack, and we'll make a siyum together as we celebrate the completion of tractate Sotah on Friday. And then we'll do the first page of tractate Gittin, the next tractate. Have a great